Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here with us on the WriteHer Podcast, a series that brings two women together to share their thoughts about all things writing, public relations, journalism, and all things in between. My name is Jillian Brander, a social media strategist, content creator, and lifelong learner. And here I have Cathi Douglas, owner of a firm providing public relations counseling and communication expertise to a number of different areas. How are you doing today, Cathi?
I'm great. Thank you for doing this with me.
Absolutely. I think this is going to be, a fun series. It's a casual conversation between two women, someone who's definitely learning how to write, learning the world of journalism, and someone like yourself who has such great experience and stories. I'm so excited. There's so many series and podcasts awaiting. So, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself and where you worked and your experience?
Sure. My career spans a few different industries. I was a journalism major at Cal State Fullerton right at the time when Woodward and Bernstein had just cracked the Watergate case. So everybody entering in my year, the class of 76, wanted to be an investigative journalist, including me. So, but in true form, life happens to you. And so I was only a reporter for about 5 years and then segued into editing and then into magazines, which was a whole different career, and then into higher ed. So I've done quite a few different things, but always in communications.
And I mean, we're going to talk about the fun stuff of writing too. And I wish I had a podcast like this to listen to when I was in high school because your perspective is so valuable. So, what's your favorite if you had to choose? Do you have a favorite that you've worked in, whether it's PR, journalism, magazines?
Well, I think I'm enjoying my career now more than I ever have. And that's because I kind of found myself forcibly retired. And that was about 8 years ago. And I never knew I had an entrepreneurial bone in my body, but I started my own freelance business and it just kind of took off before I even had the structure laid. And I am really having fun. I have a lot of different clients, mostly colleges and universities, college systems, that kind of thing, but also some nonprofit and some healthcare. And the greatest thing about not collecting a paycheck is, of course, you can say no when you don't want to do something. So, but the thing that I love most is feature writing. I think that's my top skill, and I'm using that every day. And every day is different. I've got a lot of different projects going, large ones, small ones, and I like the variety. Now, I will say that there's nothing like working in a newsroom. At least there wasn't. Nowadays, I don't think that there are newsrooms the way that we understood them way back when. But back before 24/7 news was a thing, when you were working on a daily newspaper, you were the first people to know anything that happened in the world. And there was something about the camaraderie of a newsroom that I really loved. But I will say that other than working in my own living room, which I love, probably the best environment outside of the newsroom was a university because 24/7 there's stuff going on. Everybody's passionate about what they're doing. They're all super smart. And it's just knowing that you're doing things for the benefit of college students is a really wonderful thing. At the end of the day, you know that what you're doing really matters.
Yeah, so true. I mean, I currently work at Cal State, my alma mater. I have to,
And
Cal
mine too.
State. Yes, it's so great from alum to alum. My gosh, it's so wonderful because I feel like, the experience that you talk about, as a student and just the time of newspaper and news. Like now, I feel like news is exceptionally valuable still. And things like social media have kind of turned the news world, the newspaper world, like upside down. So um
Right.
yeah, that's a whole podcast series in itself, right? News, from news to newspaper to social
Right.
media news. I mean, what's
Well,
all
I
there?
feel like I got out right at the right time. I only left newspapers because I had a baby. And really, it was kind of like, do I want to work 60 hours a week and get paid nothing, or do I want to have at least some time with my husband and child? So I kind of kicking and screaming transitioned into public relations, never having taken a PR class in my life, and really having had no desire to ever enter PR. I found myself at a really small boutique PR agency in Irvine, and I loved it. I loved it from the very beginning because um, I was able to use all of the skills that I had accrued in news and actually benefit clients. And what I found was that people were willing to pay good money for good writing and good communication skills. And I'm always really grateful that I had that experience because as a news person, um, everybody in the newsroom is a really skilled writer. But when you're at a PR agency and you're working for clients, they really value all of those skills. And until you're in that position, you really don't know how valuable those skills are. But what I started to say was, I feel like I left journalism right at the right time because it was, well, now when you're a reporter, you are a videographer, a camera person,
Right.
a social media influencer, and you're writing a story for whatever publication you're doing. And I don't know that I would have had the bandwidth to do all that. When I was a journalist, you wrote stories and you worked with a photographer, possibly a graphic artist, and that was it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I could talk. I want everybody to hear your story of, being a woman in the journalism world too. Yeah, just wearing so many different hats. It seems, like
Well, the greatest thing about a communications degree I found was that it's super flexible. I never in a million years, even though I did internships at both newspapers and magazines, but ultimately I really liked the grind of the daily newspaper. So I worked at the Orange County Register. That was my first job. And I also freelanced for a few other magazines. And so I had the best of both worlds, but I never would have thought just in a few short years I was going to be a copy editor and an assignment editor and a feature editor. And I worked on a city desk, and then I was managing editor of a monthly news magazine, um, and then transitioned into PR and then into higher ed. If you had told me in 1980 when I graduated that I was going to do all that, I would never have believed you, because really the only thing I wanted to do was be a daily newspaper reporter.
man, the grind that I can only imagine a newsroom being like, especially in the 80s. What was it? What was Now I know we're kind of still talking about, your experience in journalism, and we'll get into your later experience, after you graduated, but what was it like being a female and
It
a
was really fun.
yeah, like what was it like?
Well, when I first was hired at the Register, it was before the advent of Chris Anderson, and he was the one that kind of changed things from what was a small regional, well, it wasn't small, but it was a regional daily, kind of schlocky almost, to what it became, which was a real powerhouse in national journalism. Um, but when I first started, there was actually a women's section, if you can imagine that. And later, of course, they changed it to Accent, which was like the feature section, which is where Dear Abby is, and the gardening and all that good stuff. But I was hired as a daily reporter to cover schools. So I covered South County, K through 12, and then community colleges in the South County. And so I did that for a couple of years and then got onto a city beat. I covered a couple of cities. And then, but it was really exciting because it was the days of newspapers when, everybody smoked in the newsroom and it was full of typewriters. So that was the song that you heard, when you were on deadline every night. And we actually had paste pots on our desk full of rubber cement. And the stories that we would type would be on newsprint. So you'd type a page and always have a carbon copy so that you would have a copy of your story. And then as the pages came out, you would glue them together with the rubber cement. And then you would say, copy boy, or you would go and give it to your editor and they would actually edit with a pencil on this newsprint. And then once that was completed, when the assignment editor looked it over, then the copy desk would look it over, then it would get typeset. Now, back in those days, they had what they called the back shop. And there was a whole group of women, usually women, all they did was typeset stories. So from my typewriter, then it would go to another person who would just type the whole thing out again.
Wow.
To be fed into a big computer. And then those columns would come out. The columns would come out, newspaper column size. Those would be fed into a waxer. The waxing machine would get the wax on the back, and then that's how you would paste the stories together on big broadsheet, dummies. And that's how we did the newspaper. So you had an X-Acto knife in the back shop. Well, they had a back shop full of people who did that kind of work. And as an editor, when I would come in there and look at later, reporters didn't do this, but later when I was an editor, go in the back shop, you were not allowed to pick up an X-Acto knife and move things yourself. You would have to say, please move this headline here. Please make this bigger. And then the paste up artist would do it for you.
There you go.
So when I was at the register during the transition from typewriters to computers, I remember it really vividly because there were people who did not trust the computers. I'm not letting go of my typewriter. I know this computer thing is not going to work out. So I'm going to hang on to my typewriter. But, so if you can imagine, that was a huge technological change. And what I found was that made me like 100,000% better writer, because when you're on a typewriter and you have to retype or you're Xing stuff out and then you're pasting it with the paste pot, that's a whole lot of hassle. But if you're moving paragraphs on a computer or you're splitting your screen so you can use your notes, those were just phenomenal new technological marvels that made everybody better. And then of course it made editing faster, and then 24/7 news happened, but all those people in the back shop lost their jobs because we didn't need them anymore. All the graphics were done on the computer, and so there was an entire segment of the newspaper population that wasn't needed anymore. Typesetters, paste up artists, back shop production managers, all those people. So but it was back to the newsroom. It was full of smoke. It was super noisy because of the computers, and there were very few women.
Oh my God.
There were, I did have a woman editor who was on the city desk. She was, I think, the first. But most of them were guys, and it was a very macho place. Later, when I started, well, even now with the Me Too thing, it's very interesting because in my day, I had male editors tell me to just suck it up, essentially. If there was a problem with any kind of harassment, you were expected to just buck up and deal with it, just do your job. And it was really hard.
Sounds like and you were saying you were like the only woman in that situation other than your, you know,
There were a few. I mean, I wasn't the only one, but I felt like I was one of the only ones
yeah.
in the newsroom situation. So it was different.
How did you deal with that? Like, how did you,
I
like,
grew up really fast. I came from an all girls Catholic school
mhm.
in high school. So when I went to college, I was super naive. And working for 4 years on the Daily Titan toughened me up a little bit. And then, of course, I always was a what they call a stringer. They don't have them now, but I worked part-time at Orange County was full of small daily newspapers that you could go and get a job at. So I just walked into the Daily News Tribune in Fullerton one day and said, hey, I'm a student at Cal State Fullerton and I want to do some freelancing. You can pay me or not, but I really need a string book and I need some experience. And they put me to work right away. And I worked there for almost as long as I worked for the Daily Titan, several years. And you just learned to take it. I mean, I think it was wrong. I think that it's good that today women have rights and are fighting for them. But to a certain extent, back then you were expected to act like a man in the sense of
Interesting.
not let anything shock you, be able to take a joke at your own expense,
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
certainly to endure a certain amount of catcalls, that kind of stuff. Um, it wasn't good and it wasn't positive, but it was something that it was just a different environment. I'm
Yeah.
glad things have changed.
Me too. Me too. I'm sure, there's always room to improve in any industry like that. What would you tell, a lot of advice I'm asking you, like, what would you say? What would you tell, a young journalist who may be going through something similar, or, who is trying to grow up fast, but, not having it really affect them? Like, what would you?
Gosh, I don't know. I would hope that today the environment is different. Um, I went to an editor once because a source that I had to cover was harassing me. And at the time, I covered a city and I was expected to go to the police department a few times a week. And I would walk by this guy's office and he would hit on me. And I knew he was married with kids, but he was a really high ranking guy in the police department. And I kind of needed him as a source. Well, it got to be pretty bad. And so I went to my editor at the paper, who was a very venerable man who actually was a Daily Titan advisor before he went to the Register, named Gary Granville. He's passed on, but he was a great mentor to a lot of us. And I sat him down, we had coffee, and he said, look, you could be 40 pounds heavier and 40 years older, and it's still going to happen. So you need to learn to live with it. And the best way to be would be for you to find a different entrance into the police department. Don't go by his desk. Cultivate other sources. In other words, you have to
Work around it.
your way around it. These days, I do admire people for standing up for themselves, for women who are demanding equal rights and equal protection under the law. But in my day, that wasn't a thing. It was, if you were going to be in that kind of world, then you were expected to behave in a certain way. I guess what I would say to a young journalist is, if you're covering the news business, you have to get tough anyway. And I think that if you love writing and you love reporting and you want to serve the public, it's one of the most noble professions, and it still is, and it's really, really important right now that we have good journalism, whether it's online or electronic or whatever kind of journalism.
Right.
we need that light to be shown on our public officials and our and the people who are supposedly our servant leaders in government. You know, they need to be held to account. And it's frightening. When newspapers started dying, it was really frightening. And
For
I think
sure.
um, I think now people are waking up and realizing that services here in Orange County, like Voice of Orange County, I'm a huge supporter of theirs because I really feel like for most of the time, good local journalism, you have to find it on Voice of Orange County because they're actually holding public officials accountable. I think they were the ones that broke the whole Anaheim mayor and city council scandal with
Mm,
the backroom Disneyland and Angels deals, and I think the
right.
Register and everybody kind of followed suit, but you know, unfortunately, that subscriber supported or donor supported kind of journalism is going to be a thing, you know, and it's a place where young journalists can find jobs and they're really performing a huge public service.
So true. I mean, you have so much experience, Cathi. People are going to be learning from you. My gosh, on the Write Her podcast. You heard it here. So, journalism is just one of the many things that you've been involved in, right? Um, you know, what is some of your other favorite works that you've done, whether it be you are you
Well, I'll tell you a funny story.
perfect.
Well, two funny stories. When I was at the Register, I had an intern who would, I kind of just mentored this young woman. She's 4 years younger than I am and was from Cal State Fullerton. She was doing her internship at the Register. And we became really good friends as well as colleagues. And about 4 years later, I think she became my boss. So, and I can say I just got back from Phoenix visiting her. That's where she lives now. We've stayed friends for 40 years. And in spite of the fact that, you know, I bossed her around and then she bossed me around. But that's a great story that I like to bring out in terms of the importance of networking. And you have to be nice to everybody because you don't know who's going to be your boss someday.
Yeah.
The other thing was she was the one that called me one day. I was on the copy editing desk at the community newspapers. I was part of the team at the Orange County Register that started the community sections. And basically what those did eventually was scoop up all the little daily newspapers. So like the Anaheim Bulletin, which was its own daily newspaper, became the Anaheim section of the Orange County Register. So when I was there, I was a copy editor, functioning also as kind of like a mini daily newspaper editor. I had a couple of reporters that worked for my section, and I was in charge of laying it out and graphics and all that stuff. So, but I just gotten married and I was kind of bored with my job. I didn't see a real future in it. And I think looking back, I was really short sighted, but she caught me at a weak moment. My friend Linda called and said, "Hey, my company has just bought a very venerable 80-year-old boating magazine, and we need a managing editor. Would you be interested?" She said, "I know that you have some magazine background. Um, how about it?" And I said, "Well, I'll come and talk to them." And it was a mom and pop operation, the Duncan McIntosh Company. They were known for doing in the water boat shows, which I think they still do. And they had created Waterfront, which was I believe it was a weekly, but it might have been a monthly. It was like a newspaper magazine.
Oh, like a newsletter.
Yeah, well, no, it was fancier. I mean, it was like a
Fancier.
professional publication, but it was on newsprint.
Oh,
And then this new magazine that they'd purchased was a venerable old publication called SEA. And it was the magazine of boating in the West. It covered 13 Western states but primarily ocean going boating. and primarily power boats as opposed to sailboats, but both. And by the time Duncan bought it, they had like 5 national advertisers left. I mean, Peterson Publishing had purchased it a few years before, and they only know automotive stuff, or they did then. So they didn't really know what to do with sea. So Duncan bought it, and he was a boater and a long time, publisher in the boating community. So he bought Sea and brought it down to Newport Beach in a bunch of boxes, and that was the magazine. So Duncan and his wife hired me as managing editor. I come in for my first day of work on a Monday morning, and I've got my dress on, and I'm all excited. And his wife takes me aside. She's the co-publisher, and she says, Cathi, we haven't fired the old editor yet, the one that we're unhappy with. So, and we don't want to really let him go on a weekday. We're going to let him go on Friday afternoon. So would you please, we're going to tell him that we've hired him an assistant. And will you please go along with this for a week? Knowing what I know now, I would have said, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm going to go see if I can get my job at the Orange County Register back now.
Oh,
But I didn't really, I was green around the gills. I didn't know what I was doing. So I said, okay. And so they introduced me to this guy. And during the week, he's like introducing me to people like, here's Cathi. She's a good little assistant.
oh,
That was his attitude.
my.
So Friday rolls around, Friday afternoon, and Duncan takes him out for drinks and fires him. And I come in on Monday morning, and so this guy has gone and taken the, he used to have the company credit card. He took the company credit card to the Newport Harbor Yacht Club that night and ran up a $200 bar bill. He bought drinks for everybody in the house. And then he got on the phone and he called every single freelance writer and photographer who had worked for Sea and badmouthed me, said, this new girl, doesn't know anything about boating. She's never been on a boat in her life. And you shouldn't work for them because they're really awful people. So when I came to work on Monday morning, not only did I have like no experience with boating and really no experience putting out a monthly magazine,
Yeah.
For a semi-national audience, a regional audience, but I had a bunch of a stable of writers and photographers who were told not to work with me.
Oh my gosh.
So, like I said,
Art.
I did not enjoy that job. Although working with Linda was nice, and we did have a nice, we put together a really good editorial staff. But that experience of like, well, that's where the rubber hits the road. And if you can like bite down and like do it, by the time I left I think I was there for 2 years, and I really missed newspapers. So I ended up going back to newspapers. But during those 2 years, I learned magazine production from the ground up and how to put out a monthly magazine, how to work with freelance writers, how to hire freelance photographers, how to set up a helicopter shot at sea to get the best angle of a boat for the cover, everything to do with getting a monthly magazine out and staying within a budget. So those 2 years were kind of like a boot camp for magazines. And I know that I wouldn't be able to do my current job now because some of my clients are magazines and universities who publish magazines. And I wouldn't have never been hired at my first higher ed job at Chapman University, because part of being PR director was editing the magazine. So those 2 years were so bad that sometimes I would cry all the way to work. That was how bad it was. But I stuck it out, and I'm really proud of it. And thank God, because if I hadn't had magazine experience, then half of my career would not have been possible.
Wow, that is so interesting. Like, it's like that terrible experience, you used it to shape into something that would launch, I mean, this career of and experience and network of clients that you have. That's pretty incredible. I'd be pretty proud if I was you, Cathi. I would be pretty proud.
Well, I love what I'm doing now because, for instance, with the magazine experience, I just had a client meeting today, and I'm going to do I'm working with the staff at Cal State East Bay on their fall magazine. I
Nice.
did the spring magazine with them, and it's all the things that I loved about working at Cal State Fullerton, collaborating with an art director and a really creative team, and also feature writing, and then working with freelancers. So I'm looking forward to it, but that wouldn't have been possible had I not had that sea experience. So.
Seeing the sea experience. Well, I mean, so true. Yeah, at Cal State Fullerton, I love the magazine, and we can have a whole podcast series on the future of magazines, because it's like, what's going to make people read a magazine? What's going to make someone keep a magazine? It's like, definitely collaborating with art directors is wonderful. Do you think that if you had to choose between news writing and feature writing for a magazine, which one do you think you would choose?
Well, now I would choose magazines because I feel like feature writing is really my strength now. And I love long form journalism. I
Mm.
like being able to write 1,000, 2,000 words. And I enjoy really delving into a topic. Um, but, I'm not 21 anymore. When I was 21, I wanted to be out covering the news. Um, I have a funny story where I was on my way to a wedding one Saturday, and I had my hose and my high heels on and a dress, and this huge brush fire broke out in East Orange, which was where I lived at the time, with three other reporters. That's another story. And they called me in to cover the fire, and I didn't have a chance to change clothes. And I actually went out in my dress. I think I finally did grab a pair of tennis shoes, but I mean, I was out covering this major fire. Me and probably 20 other writers, because it was a huge, huge fire. And
Wow.
it went on for several days, as I recall. But so I was just covering one edge of the fire. And I'm still very dear friends with a woman who at the time was an intern with the Red Cross. And you know how the Red Cross sets up those, they're like refugee,
Yeah, like buses.
people who are evacuated from the fire go to a high school or whatever in a big gymnasium. And part of my job was to interview people who had been evacuated from this fire. So I met my friend Pam. I was in my dress covering this fire, and she was interning for the Red Cross. So we're still friends. And so, but I like to tell that story because I was so unprepared. Later, I realized that you had to have a go bag,
Hmm. Yeah.
car or near your car. But the same year, we had terrible floods, and I lived in a house with these three other registered reporters, and we all went out to cover different areas of the flood. And the flood went on for days. And we would come home, all of us would be working like 20-hour days, would come home, and none of us had any clothes that were not wet by the end of the week. I mean, we were just like working day and night on this flood, going out to Silverado Canyon or going out to Huntington Beach, wherever we were going to go for the day. And then none of us had a chance to do laundry. So we were just putting on wet clothes the next day doing.
Gosh, that is
It was really,
crazy.
it was really a hard part of the job.
Yeah, even like myself, I have a go bag too. In social media, there can always be some kind of,
Yep.
emergency, on or off a campus or wherever. So I
Yes.
definitely, that's a great tip. Keep
So,
a go bag.
and I don't I don't need that adrenaline rush anymore,
I think I
but
do.
I liked it when I was 21. So I think what I prefer now is delving into a topic more and, writing features.
Oh yeah, that's see, I'm 29, so I'm like just on the cusp of like I could go out, but I would like to stay home. So
Yes.
yeah, I'm doing a lot more reading and exploring with that and blogging too. Blogging's like, a great option for those who, want to share their thoughts and stuff. You have a blog, that's what we're gonna plug here. You have a blog that people are gonna read. But like a go bag and like what you said earlier between you know um powering through challenging situations as a woman. It was recently Women Empowerment Day, so go us, women in the work field. And my last question is what tips would you have for new journalism graduates, PR, just green, graduates who are ready to take on the world? What kind of tips would you give them?
I think in my life, there are two skills that I think have been invaluable. The first is writing. And what I mean is being able to take any kind of writing assignment and do it. So if you're given a piece of fundraising text and you have to write promotional copy to try to get people to donate to the university, being able to do that. Being able to then turn around and write a feature story on a professor and his research for the magazine. And then perhaps a marketing director calls you at the last minute and says, I need a bunch of tip sheets on different health issues, and I need them like in 2 days. Can you do 10 of them? Being able to write pretty much anything and do it well the first time, accurately and on deadline. That has been my mainstay. And when I went out on my own, the fact that people knew I could work on deadline, I could be accurate, I could talk to people and interview them well, and I could turn around usable text in a you know for on a budget well. Um, that's been my whole career, is good writing. Then the second thing is networking. If I hadn't had the network that I have, then no one would have ever hired me when I found myself retired. Um, and I was able to. I just got on Facebook. I was kind of naive. Like 3 days after my job had been eliminated, basically, and I found myself kind of forcibly retired. I got on Facebook when I calmed down, and I said, I find myself out of a job, and I feel like I have a lot of good time left in me. If you have any kind of writing or reporting assignments, give me a call. And I think I had 75 responses.
Oh,
So
Facebook for the win, coming in the next.
yeah, and I mean, people later said, "Wow, that was kind of I don't know, gutsy or silly. I don't know which one. Kind of a strange way to go about it." And I said, "Well, I didn't know what else to do, and what I found was that my business took off before I had the infrastructure to really handle it. So, like, I didn't know how to do invoicing, or I mean, I just didn't know how to do anything. So, that's a different story for a different day. But, without that network, and I'd really worked on networking from the time I was a freshman at Cal State Fullerton to now, in higher education circles, in publishing circles, in journalism, and in public relations. So I had like this base of possible clients to draw from, and it was all that experience plus all that networking. Having 3 little kids and a really demanding job, and then going out for a really bad rubber chicken dinner because you know that you have to network on a weeknight when you really just want to go home. That all came back to help me when I went out on my own. All those rubber chicken dinners paid off.
Oh wow. I'm so glad. See, networking and being able to take any piece of writing and turn it into something great. That is just such good advice. I mean, I could talk all day about all the experiences and magazines and things like that. I definitely have a quite a bit to learn, but it's been such a pleasure chatting with you today.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, this is the first of many fun digital projects we're doing. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this week to chat about journalism everywhere and in the writing world. Stay tuned and follow us for more fun. And have you guys written lately?